AZ Water virtual luncheon. This is the last one of the season as we pH certificates are available through AZ Water Association. If you have not been getting any emails from AZ Water, that would be from staff@azwater.org. Send Shayna an email and we'll get that contact list up to date. So as I mentioned, we are on the last luncheon for the year for the 2020-2021 season. So these will pick up again in September. Not really sure if they'll continue to be virtual or at some point if they'll go back to being in person, but we'll be sure to update you and let you know as that progresses towards the end of this year. Today's sponsor is HDR. I'm actually with HDR, so I will be doing kind of our intro here. We had put together a video. I'll kind of fast forward. It was playing as you probably came in. Just kind of highlighting some of the projects that HDR has done in the water sector and the Southwest in particular. So just some photos from different projects over time. We'll just kind of let it run for a little bit longer, looking at some other projects and some photos. Alrighty, we will keep that in. And so today's presentation, like every year, we have Deanna from Central Arizona Project here to present an annual update for CAP. So I'll do a brief introduction of Deanna. So Deanna Kia is a senior water policy analyst at CAP, or Central Arizona Project, focused on implementing policies and programs to protect and enhance CAP's Colorado River water supply. Deanna's career spans more than 20 years in the water resources. She previously worked for the Arizona Department of Water Resources, ADWR, and Arizona municipalities. She joined CAP in 2016. Deanna has a bachelor's degree in engineering from the Colorado School of Mines and a master's degree in civil engineering from Arizona State University. If you give me one moment, I'm going to switch slides over to Deanna's slide.
Great. Thanks, Scott, for the introduction. Thanks for having me back again. I always enjoyed the invite to come and speak with you guys, and it's nice to see some familiar names and faces, even if you're just in two-dimensional sitting here on my desk looking back at me. So anyway, thank you for having me. I see that we have some other CAP people too. So anyway, maybe they can help me with some of the questions if they come up. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. I'm just going to give you an update on some of the things going on at CAP. I'm going to tell you about some of our operations here in 2021 and do a look ahead for what we might expect next year, and then kind of give you a little overview of some other things going on in CAP. So starting here with the operations in 2021, you know that we're operating under the 2007 guidelines. Under that document, the goal of those operations are to balance the content of Lakes Powell and Lake Mead. So many of the actions are geared towards that. And this year in 2021, we're also operating under the DCP agreement, and we're under the second full year of operating under those. And as you'll recall, the DCP agreement's goal was to prevent both Lakes Powell and Lake Mead from going to critically low elevation. So those are the goals that we're trying to reach here. So next. Under the 2007 guidelines, our operations here in 2021, you'll remember that the actual actions for that started back in August of last year. So we look at the August 24-month study of the year before, and we look at the projections at that time of what the end of December is going to look like. So as of last year, when they looked at this, the Lake Powell elevation was less than the equalization elevation which was 3659, and from the guidelines, that elevation changes every year. That was what it was for this year. And Lake Powell was also to be greater than 3575. The projection was for 3592. And Lake Mead elevation, it was projected to be greater than 1075, and the projection was 1085. So with those data points, it met the criteria of falling under the upper elevation balancing tier. And what that means is that we would get a release from Lake Powell of 8.23 million acre feet. Next. So also under the upper elevation balancing tier, there's the option for an April adjustment. And what that was supposed to do is that, the decisions are made last year before the winter happened, before the snowpack. And if we were to have a really great snowpack, while that's really good, because Lake Powell's elevation is still in the higher end, it could put it dangerously close to needing to do flood control releases. So it wanted to have the option to be able to release more than that 823. So there's this April adjustment opportunity, we'll say. So the first thing they look at is Lake Powell's elevation from the April 24-month study, looking forward to the September projection. Is that supposed to be greater than the equalization elevation, which is that 3659? And if that was the case, we would go into equalization. But if you click next, you'll see that we didn't meet that criteria anywhere near that. So then the next thing they look at is whether Lake Powell's elevation is greater than 3575, and if Lake Mead's elevation is less than 1075. So remember, we're trying to balance the two reservoirs. And based on the March 24-month study, as just maybe a sneak peek at what might be happening, it's showing that the elevation is going to be 3557. So obviously it's not going to meet that criteria. So if you click next, you'll see that we're going to stay solidly in the 823 million acre feet release from Lake Powell. So why is that happening? It's because of the snowpack that we're getting this year. It's not that great, spectacular snowpack that we were hoping for, I guess. So you'll see our current snowpack is there in the blue compared to the 30-year average, 30-year median in the purple. The green line is what happened last year. And, last year you'd say, oh, well, it was pretty close to the average. Well, if you remember, the actual runoff that came from that was actually only about 50% of the average inflow. So there were other conditions that led to it not giving as much runoff as what we would have liked. So that if we look next, there were some very smart people in Colorado River. That would be my boss, Chuck Cullum, who is like this walking encyclopedia of Colorado River information. And he was looking at the trace of what we were seeing for this year. And he said, that looks an awful lot like the traces that we saw in 2018 and 2012. So sure enough, we plot that up. And yes, that the blue line looks very, similar to the traces that we saw in 2018 and 12, which are there in the red and green. So we'll have to see how this year plays out. We're about a couple weeks away from the end of the snowpack accumulation season, so we'll see where we top out, and then we'll see how the snowmelt happens. Like you can see, the 2012 year, the red, it had a very steep decline to the trace there, meaning that the snowpack melted very quickly, and it's been really warm in the upper basin. So we'll have to see what happens. But looking at the next slide, you'll see the resulting impact of a 2012 or a 2018 snowpack. The runoff that happened in those 2 years were some of the lowest runoff seasons that we've seen since 2000. So the projections for this year are also running about less than half. The latest one that I saw was about 47% of the average is what they're projecting for the runoff this year. It is what it is, and we'll hope that maybe Mother Nature's a little bit more generous to us next year. But that's where we are. In the next slide, I just kind of want to give a little recognition to the CDRFC. I know I've talked with this group before about this organization, the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center, and they really are just a wealth of information that we look to on a daily basis for both data as far as what is actually happening in the basin, as well as doing the forecast. Their forecasts are the ones that go into creating the 24-month study, which is created by the Bureau of Reclamation, but they use the forecast from the CDRC. And what they do is they use current conditions, which they have data galore on their website, and that's what they track. That's what they do. Saying what are the current conditions. So they have snowpack, precipitation. They have the preceding soil moisture conditions leading into the season. And they use that as the starting point. They have weather forecasts that may look at the 5 to 10 day forecast for what they think is going to happen with temperature and precipitation. And then they also use a range of scenarios that have happened historically to give us a range of forecasts that they use, this ensemble of forecasts. And that's what goes into the 24-month study. But the website that I've highlighted here is this situational awareness for the upper Colorado River Basin that just kind of has a snapshot of what's going on in the upper basin. So the pie charts show how the snowpack has accumulated in the different subbasins of the feeding into the whole Colorado River. And the bar chart at the bottom, while it's a very nice and colorful chart that shows how we're looking in the projection for the stream flow, the inflows coming into Lake Powell, the projections, you'll see that our projection is sitting more on the lower side. So anyway, they do a very good job of presenting the data. And if you're interested in that kind of information, the SWE charts that we showed, I would point you to this website for sure. So now, how does all that information play into how CAP is operating in 2021? This is a chart that we like to show. This is posted on our website under the water operations page under deliveries. If you want to look at it, if you want to check it out later or see when we post information for 2022 also. But it's just a nice little summary of what CAP is doing and how we're operating. The time frame for this table is the DCP time frame, so it starts in 2019. And you'll see that a tier isn't listed there because even though the DCP documents were signed in 2019, we weren't fully under the obligation of operating under those all of the agreements fully in 2019. But we did make best efforts to meet the intent of that for sure. But you'll see that in 2020 we were under a tier 0, and also in this year we're under a tier 0. And that first section of the data there is the action to meet the obligations of Arizona's contributions to Lake Mead under DCP of 192,000 acre-feet. And under the DCP, it's written as Arizona's obligation, but due to the priority of where CAP sits in the state, the obligation falls to CAP. So this shows our actions that we're taking in order to meet that. You'll see that in 2021, we're accomplishing that through our Ag Forbearance 3 program, as well as the Compensated Conservation Program. So the Ag Forbearance 3 program is a very successful program that we've been doing for several years now in partnership with many ag districts. We have 12 ag districts that are contributing to that are in the Phoenix area and the Pinal AMA area. And the Compensated Conservation Program is an agreement that CAP has with the Metropolitan Domestic Water Improvement District. The remaining amount that isn't created from those two programs is created by CAWCD not delivering water from its excess pool, so water that would have gone to the CAGRD or the water bank. The other actions that are shown in the table here, you'll recall from the DCP, the Arizona DCP process, was that there was a desire to create this offset, mitigation offset volume. And the goal was to create the 400,000 acre feet. And that was because CAWCD was pledging 400,000 acre-feet of ICS credits that we've created. So that's 400,000 acre-feet that's sitting in Lake Mead. Well, if we take that out to meet these mitigation efforts, that's coming out of Lake Mead. So there was concern that, well, we don't want that to happen. We're going to put 400,000 acre-feet back into the lake. So that's what that mitigation offset component is. And those volumes have been largely created by the work done by the Gila River Indian community in creating ICS credits, as well as the Colorado River Indian tribes on the main stem of the river doing a system conservation program. There was also a component of the DCP that had obligations by the U.S. government. And so through reclamation, they are working to create those obligations to Lake Mead. They're doing that with their agreements with the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation and the Mojave Valley Irrigation and Drainage District. When you sum all these up, you'll see that CAP is planning to not deliver basically about 307,000 acre-feet, 308,000. The first part is CAP's contribution to Lake Mead because of the DCP, but the rest of it is our forbearance because the way that the priorities work, if these entities didn't take that water under other circumstances, that water would have flown to lower priority users. And so CAP would have had the opportunity to take that water. But because of the DCP agreements, because we want to recognize the good work that's being done by these other organizations, and we want to see that conservation happen in Lake Mead also, we agree to forbear on taking that water. And so this is, in sum, the amount that CAP is not going to be taking this year. However, we're still planning on a delivery of about 1.3, I think, million acre-feet off of the river. So, so even in spite of this not being delivered. Okay, so next, let's look at what we're looking at for what might be happening in 2022. Thank you. When you look at the results from the 24-month study, and this is from March, you'll see that there's a projection out, and we can look ahead. The bar in the middle there shows the end of this year, and so that is at least what they're currently projecting the elevation will be. And you'll see the blue line is the most probable, and that's what we expect it mostly to come in close to. And you'll see that we hit at the end of the year well under the trigger for a tier 1 elevation. So the 1075 line is that dashed gold line, and we come in at about 1069. So that will put us, we're thinking, pretty much in a tier 1 situation in 2022. So what does that mean? In the next slide, you'll see that under this tier, Arizona's reduction based on just the guidelines alone is 320,000 acre-feet. That's what has been in the guidelines. We have been planning for that. Also, Nevada will be taking 13,000 acre-feet, and no California reduction under the guidelines. However, Mexico had also agreed to contribute about 50,000 acre-feet under minute 323. Now, the DCP agreements came in place, and there were additional contributions that were identified. So Arizona's additional DCP contribution was that 192 that we've been talking about. So that means a total of 512,000 acre-feet of a cut to Arizona is what we can be expecting in 2022. Under DCP, Nevada has to make an additional contribution, also bringing their total up to 21,000. And at this tier, California is not contributing under the DCP. However, under lower shortage tiers, California would be contributing if and when we get that low. But under this tier, Mexico had also agreed to take an additional 30,000 acre-feet, bringing their total to 80,000 acre-feet, and theirs is under their equivalent of the DCP agreement, and that was called the Binational Water Scarcity Contingency Plan. A real mouthful. So now let's look at this is the pictorial representation, I guess, of the mitigation efforts that were developed from the Arizona DCP process. You'll recall that many of us were in many meetings working on this. Basically, you know, with the DCP, you'll see that that was an additional cut to people that hadn't really been planned for, and this DCP mitigation effort was a way to have all of the Colorado River stakeholders look at how we can mitigate those impacts to the affected parties, so mostly to CAP parties. And what they came up with was this plan here. But you'll see if you click next in 2020 and then again in 2021, we did not fall into this category, right? We weren't in the Tier 1 shortage until projected to be in 2022. So luckily, we didn't have to do mitigation in 2020 and 2021. But that's kind of why 2022 kind of feels like a big deal, is because this is the first year we're going to be implementing some of these agreements. And there's a lot of moving parts to make them happen, but it's pretty interesting how it's happening. I'm going to show you that. But what the mitigation that we are trying to provide is that the NIA pool will be made whole, so they would have 100% mitigation under a Tier 1, and the ag pool will get 105,000 acre feet under this mitigation plan. So you'll see in the next slide that we have a schedule planned out for this year in order to make this happen. You'll see there's a couple of meetings and key things right now. We have the finance meeting coming up for the board later in April, as well as we're looking for the 24-month study from April. But as you know, that's probably not going to be very kind of a nothing burger, I guess. And then we have obviously the August 24-month study coming up too. But if you click next, you'll see that we have plenty of meetings and activities planned for this next year that have to do with this mitigation plan. Throughout this whole first part of the year, we've been having many agency coordination meetings. We have a public meeting coming up at the end of April that is a joint CAP, ADWR, and Bureau of Reclamation workshop to go over these mitigation plans. We have a CAP customer workshop coming up in June, and there's nothing happening in July, but I'm pretty sure it's going to get filled up with other meetings. But it'll all lead up to the annual CAP water users meeting that we have right before we go into the season where you would place your water orders, and that'll be a different year going into 2022. So we want to make sure we have good coordination, and so you'll see that there's plenty of thought and process that's going into trying to have a lot of stakeholder engagement and coordination with certainly all of the mitigation parties, but all of CAP stakeholders. This is what we have kind of on the calendar now. I'm pretty sure it's going to get filled in with even more meetings as we go along. So let's see what this mitigation looks like. It's simple, right? It's just all of these words and different parties and all of these squiggly lines, but if we break it down, it actually makes a lot of sense. It is very busy for sure, but kind of cool how it all come together. So the overarching framework agreement, the upper gray in the middle, kind of keeps everything together, and it's keeping the two main agreements kind of organized, I guess. So we have the ag mitigation on the left in the green, and the NIA mitigation agreement that's shown on the right. And the water resources, we have our tank of water resources that are going to be used to meet all those mitigation needs. And so within that, we have Lake Pleasant water that was pledged at 50,000 acre feet. We have an agreement that was struck between CAP and SRP to exchange water between the two entities. And that's going to have 50,000 acre feet available to us. I talked about the 400,000 acre feet of CAWCD ICS credits that we have pledged to be able to be available for mitigation. Federal firming and firming by the water bank is Arizona water planning efforts that have been in place for years. And so those firming volumes will become available to help with the mitigation here also. There was also a compensated mitigation plan that was drafted up between TAWCD and the Gila River Indian community, and that is essentially providing compensation, financial compensation for not taking some of the water. And then there was also efforts to provide additional infrastructure for the agricultural community, as well as agreements to facilitate USF to GSF transfers. So when you put all those pieces together, they go out to the ag mitigation and the NIA mitigation parties to help meet that goal of what we were talking about of bringing the NIA pool to 100% and the ag pool up to 105. And so you'll see in the next slide how those kind of come together. This is maybe a slide that more of you are familiar with. This shows the impacts of what that 512,000 acre-foot cut would have looked like to CAP water users. This is before the mitigation. So this is what the Tier 1 would have done to us. Maybe you can recall that how this graph looks when we're full is that it shows our highest priority is lowest in the graph. So the P3 is the highest priority. Building up then to M&I and Indian is the next highest priority. There's the NIA priority pool. Usually on top of that, we have the ag pool. And on top of that, we have our excess pool, which would have gone to the CHERD and the water bank. But under these cuts, you'll see that no excess water, no ag pool, and the NIA priority pool has been cut by about 60%. But if you see in the next click, you'll see what the mitigation efforts did. And it brings us back up to provide a full NIA priority pool and a partial ag pool. All the little hash marks and cuts in there that you see are those resources that I talked about in the tank of resources. And it just kind of, there's some water that moved from the M&I priority that went up to the NIA priority. Some of it went to the ag pool through the USF and GSF arrangements. So basically, we kind of cut a little bit from some priorities and shared it with others, or met the needs with other programs such as the firming or the compensated mitigation program in order to bring us back up to provide this mitigation. So that is what the plan will be for 2022. If we look ahead, we have this data available to us through the 24-month study, and we would be remiss to not look at it and say, what we have our eyes open, and what does it look like for the year after that? And what it's looking like is that we will more than likely get a 7.48 million acre-foot release from Lake Powell in 2022. And so what that does is it shows, you'll see the blue line there, it goes even lower for Lake Mead in 2022. And that's because of this much lower release from Lake Powell. That is what's projected. Now, just keep in mind that this is still pretty far out in the future. Obviously, no decisions are being made yet on that. And certainly things can change between now and then. We could have a wet year, we could have a dry year. There's other factors that play into what will happen at Lake Mead, including the precipitation that happens in California. That precipitation will affect California's actions and how much ICS that they take out of Lake Mead, or how much they could put in if it's a very wet year. And so we'll have to just wait and see how everything plays out. But just kind of a heads up that that's what 2023 might be looking like. So but let's move on to some other CAP activities. We've got other things going on other than just keeping track of all of that. So obviously, we are doing a lot of work because we want to be aware and knowledgeable of impacts of climate change on CAP. So first off is the impacts to the CAP water supply. And so obviously we're keeping an eye on that, and we are using the best science to be knowledgeable in that. But if you click next, there are other impacts that we want to be mindful of these impacts. And this increased warming have the impacts shown on the next click, that we are also studying and developing plans for. So these higher temperatures will have effects on not only the inflows being available to CAP, but also how does that affect our infrastructure? How does that affect our canal, our pumping plants, our equipment, but also the impacts to our employees that have to work out there in these conditions. So in the next click, the other component of this is that we need to be planning for extreme events, swinging in either direction. So a part of all of this is that CAP has been developing and implementing now a climate change plan for CAP that encompasses all of these things. In the next slide, another study that we had participated in, this came out last year, is the Colorado River Basin Climate and Hydrology State of the Science Report. And kind of look to this as being a compendium of Colorado River hydrology and climate change science, I guess. It really encompasses a lot. It really pulls together all of the tools, the data, and the research that's available to us right now and provides a shared understanding of this basin that we work in and live in. The study was very, very extensive. It provides a look. Some of the things that are shown there on the right are some of the findings, I guess, that came out of this. We have a better understanding of, we've seen the data and we know that there's a reduced runoff that has been happening currently, and we have a better understanding now because of this report of some of the mechanisms behind why that's happening, just so that we better understand this environment that we're working in. So that's a really great resource. I encourage you to go and check that out. I think there's a link on the Bureau's website, and can't remember the site that it's on, but I found it on the Bureau's website myself. So I would encourage you to go and check that out. It's a really great resource. So in the next slide, there's another project that CAP has been working on. It is a study that we've been partnering with ASU. Can I go to the next one? Thank you. We had partnered with ASU to look at exploring different global climate model data to improve our response of looking at Colorado River Basin stream flows. And that actually turned into a pilot study that was used to get us a grant with NASA. And so now we are partnering together with ASU again and with NASA to look at how to use satellite data together with our ground data that we have in place, and to see how we can better utilize that data also to help us improve our long-range scenario planning and understanding some of the different climate changes that could happen and affect the runoff coming to the Colorado River. So that's kind of an exciting study. And in the next slide, we're going to come back down a little bit down to earth and tell you about some of the irrigation conservation studies that are currently ongoing. We are partnering with several different agricultural districts throughout Arizona to test this new unique design and emitter technology. It uses a gravity micro irrigation system, and it looks to have potential to improve irrigation efficiency, but at a much reduced cost. And so we're very excited to see how that study comes out. We are also currently doing a study together with the Bureau of Reclamation and the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and the Southern Nevada Water Authority that looks at the agricultural conservation quantification. This is kind of a follow-on. You'll probably remember there was this 2012 basin study that came out of Reclamation that looked at water supply and demand. And then a next step from that was this thing that was called the Moving Forward study that came out in 2015. And one of the things that came out of that is that we really want to get a better handle on the quantification of agricultural water use and of conservation measures that are being put out there. So the study that we're working on is a start towards compiling some of that information also. So that is supposed to be completed by the end of this year. So we are also going through the process of the NIA reallocation. The Director of Department of Water Resources actually provided a recommendation to the Secretary of Interior on this very reallocation back in 2014. But what happens after we make the recommendation to the Secretary is that it has to go through significant environmental studies. And so that's where this has been until very recently. The Federal Register notice came out that they could proceed with the NIA reallocation in January, and so we're moving ahead. We need to have the subcontracts in place with these new water users who will be receiving this new NIA priority water. But the goal is to have those subcontracts in place by October so that those water users can participate in placing their water orders for 2022. So if you're involved with that or you want to know more about it, please visit the stakeholder tab on our website and you can get more information. But that process is already ongoing, and I think most of the parties who need to be tied in are already working on that. But that's something exciting. And in the mitigation efforts that I talked about earlier, we are accounting for these new water users to be part of the NIA pool in that process also. So. Another thing going on is what's called this Arizona Reconsultation process. And what this is this Arizona's leg of what's being called the overall reconsultation process, which is the effort to figure out what are our operating guidelines and policies going to be after 2025, which is when the 2007 guidelines and the DCP agreements expire. So while for the longest time that felt like it was really far away, it's creeping up closer and closer, and there's a lot of big decisions that have to be made to figure out how that's going to go. So at the federal level and at the full Colorado Basin level, that process is ongoing, and certainly to be a part of that, Arizona has to have our discussions to know what are the Arizona issues. How are we going to, make sure all the Arizona parties are covered in whatever changes are being discussed? So that is being handled through this Arizona Reconsultation process, where the Arizona Colorado River stakeholders are participating in this ARC process. Now, out of that, we anticipate some smaller groups being formed to handle some of the more specific work that's involved with this. So we've got some technical work groups that can be formed. We currently have one already in place called the Modeling and Analysis Work Group. They have been tasked with being basically the technical advisory team to the ARC, and we've had four meetings so far. The goal of this group is to develop a technical base that will be, I guess, the language that we use throughout this whole process to evaluate what types of policy impacts might be being considered. So far, that work group has looked at the modeling structure that's being used throughout the basin, so that we kind of have a common language, I guess, of how we're going to be analyzing these impacts. So we've done a summary and a review, I guess, of the CRSS model, as well as the JSAM model, which is more of a local CAP model. And we've also looked at what are the impacts, or the inputs and the impacts of those inputs into the model. So it's things like the hydrology. What do we think the hydrology is going to be in the future? Is it going to mimic the historical record that we've seen from 1906, or is it going to mimic the record that we've seen since 2000, where we're more in a drier drought type of scenario? So it's things like that we need to look at, and this group will need to help guide the discussion for the ARC as far as what kind of decisions we need to make on that. There's going to be more of a smaller group, the Arizona Strategy Team, that is going to be comprised mostly of legal counsel, as well as higher water manager level people, and then moving on up, we're gonna have input into the basin process, which will probably largely be led by the director of the Department of Water Resources, Tom Bashofsky, and our general manager, Ted Cook, general manager of CAP. And so they will be the main ones participating in that. However, if they need special advice and people going into that, certainly the invitation could be opened. But that's how we foresee this process going. It largely replicates the process that we did for the Arizona DCP process, which we think was actually quite successful. And it brought a lot of people to the table to discuss the many issues. So this is certainly something big that's going on right now. If you click next, you'll see that the next thing coming up for this is the next meeting of the MOG, the Modeling and Analysis Work Group, and that's coming up on May 13th. If you would like to attend, all of these meetings are publicly broadcast on the same way that we show our board meetings. So if you go to our website and you look there under the ARC process, you'll see like the new meetings coming up for that, and you can join in. And since this is a technical group here, I would really encourage you, if you can sit in on that, you can submit questions, you can join in on the conversation, and we would certainly welcome your thoughts on that and your participation. So I would encourage you to join us for that. And then I just want to kind of wrap up by pointing you to a great little website off of our main website. It's called Know Your Water News. You can get to it if you go to our main website, and then you'll see that there's a link to it there, or just go directly here to Know Your Water News. I find it to be a great resource, but there's different stories about the CAP itself. It's very educational. It's stories about some of our employees, and those are interesting also. And it's really great information there. There are some great snapshots, like the infographics and the downloads that are fact sheets. So it's really good information. So if you have any questions about CAP, or and sometimes it starts to answer some bigger questions about water management in all of Arizona, I would encourage you to check this out. So I guess the next slide is really just my information. If you have any questions, I would certainly welcome an email from you. We can take questions here if you'd like, but there's my email, and I'd love to be in touch with you and have some conversation with you. So with that, I guess I will open it up to any other questions. So let's see, I see it in the chat. Gary has asked, what is the current status of CAP's recovery planning? Ooh, I am not involved in that process, and I don't want to speak out of order on that. But I know it is ongoing, and that our Resource and Planning and Analysis Group is working very closely with the Arizona Water Bank and ADWR to coordinate that effort. So I know it is moving along very well, and certainly, Ken Seasholes, who's in our Resource Planning and Analysis Group, he's certainly part of this mitigation effort and planning for shortage, and so I know it's all tied in together. Do you have any other questions?
If you guys prefer, instead of typing in the chat box, feel free to unmute yourself, and you can ask that way as well.
And certainly, Gary, on that, the recovery planning, if you have any more questions, I can certainly get you in touch with somebody if you have more specific questions. So please reach out if we can get you some more information. Thank you, Martin. You'll see in the chat, Martin has posted a link that you can go to. Thank you.
Alrighty, well, I'm not seeing any more questions come in or anyone unmuting themselves. So I want to thank you, Deanna, for your presentation. It was a great presentation, a lot of useful information there. And thank all of our viewers that joined in today. So as I mentioned earlier, this will conclude our 2020-2021 season for the AZ Water virtual presentations. And we will be back in September. We look forward to seeing you there.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.